it's wonderful. Thank you for being here with us. Really appreciate it. Let's kick it off then. We're running late, about an hour, but I think we can. We won't have a discussant. Roberto Hernandez may join us later, but he's not here right now. So we have 4 presenters. Each one gets 15 minutes, and then we'll have about half an hour, let's say, for questions, and we can take half an hour out of lunch, and maybe run a little bit past 4 if necessary. So we'll try to make up the time. So then, without further ado, why don't we ask Amanda Murdie. You're free to present. We have microphones if you prefer to present sitting, or if you prefer to go to the podium. It's up to you.
I'll stand.
Yeah. Great.
I'll just go like this. Hi. That's okay. All right. I feel like I'm just about to do a karaoke song or something. My name is Amanda Murdie. I'm at the University of Missouri, so this is a really good week to be here as opposed to the University of Missouri, which is blowing up. I'm here because I know Jem and I know David and I work on human rights and I love working on human rights and I think surveys are great. But I think there's a big elephant in the room. I don't know how it got up those stairs, but it's in the room. And that elephant in the room is, why exactly are we here talking about surveys and human rights? I mean, we've had a human rights literature for a long time that has not made use of surveys, and it's got us published in great places. It's helped advocacy. So why are we even here talking about surveys? I don't do large-scale surveys. I've just come into this world thanks to my connection to Jim. And from what I know, surveys are really messy. This is costly. You guys go out in the field and you're talking to people. That's yucky. It's really time-consuming. And so I guess the real question for me as I think about this is why exactly do we need to make this big time investment in surveys? And so I'm here because I've actually drank the Kool-Aid, and I believe that surveys are incredibly necessary for everything we do as human rights scholars. And so I'm going to say that surveys are necessary for 4 different things that we do as human rights scholars. So I'm an international relations specialist, and so I'm going to be coming at this from IR, which is a subfield of political science. So I hope this translates for those of you that are sociologists or from a different academic background. But what I'm going to say is that human rights surveys are necessary for 4 areas. So they're necessary for how we develop theory. They're necessary for how we test the hypotheses that come from that theory. For international relations in particular, I think focusing human rights studies on surveys helps connect us to the larger IR literature. And that's good for both how we develop future theories, but also for how we connect to our colleagues outside of this sub-area. And then finally, for all of you advocates in the room, what I hope that I do in all of my research is something with some grain of truth which could eventually help improve human rights conditions on the field. And so I think surveys give us a lot of leverage into actually doing science well in a way that actually informs human society. So that's my answer. To get there, just to give you a brief background for those that aren't from the IR subfield, historically, IR did not focus on human rights. And I think there is still a good question as to why IR scholars even focus on human rights. Why is it in the IR subfield as opposed to comparative politics? And hopefully we can talk about that over dinner in the next couple of days. But historically, what IR focused on were things that happened between countries. And so this focus on nuclear power or trade treaties or polarity, all of these things were the traditional focus of IR scholars. to say that this was the sole focus, but I think this is what you saw published in most journals maybe 50 years ago. So starting in the late 1950s, I think there was a serious push to really look at within countries, and look at what was going on within this black box of the US or China or Russia, so the Soviet Union at that time, and think about how those things actually influence the larger interstate relations. So how does a country's regime type, how does a country's dealing with an immigrant population, how do those sorts of things influence war or their alliance patterns and that sort of thing. Now, that brought a lot of depth to the study of international relations, but I think the real focus for us as human rights scholars came in the late 1970s. And this was the focus of how things at the international level really affect what's going on at the domestic level. And I think this is where human rights squarely fits within international relations. It's because you have these large international norms that have been embodied in international law, and how those things get translated into how a state actually protects its own citizens. That's definitely within this realm of scholarship that really developed in the late 1970s. Luckily, we've done some further unpacking as we look within what matters for international relations. And I think underlying every theory we make is this idea that within countries, if we go down to the very basic level, we're always talking about individuals. And so we know that the ability of an individual and their opinion to matter for alliances or to matter for war or to matter for human rights depends quite a lot on the political structures that are in place that are also determined by individual opinion. But I think there's this growing reemergence within the field that we do have to take individuals seriously and their preferences. And sometimes we're making assumptions about what individuals want that really doesn't match with reality. And I think this is one of the things where survey research can really help us inform theoretical development. So with that background, let me go through these reasons that I said quickly. First of all is this idea that if we're building theory on anything within international relations, and that theory depends on what individuals think and what individuals believe, we really have to have a good idea, even descriptively, about those individuals and their preferences. And so this becomes very important for when individuals, for example, will get off the couch and actually march. We have to know, do they actually even have a preference that is in line with something that will lead them to action. Let me give you an example from the human rights scholarship. So we've spent a lot of time in the last, maybe 20 years focusing on whether human rights treaties are actually important for human rights practices. And there's a lot of ways that you could build a theory for how human rights treaties could actually inform human rights practices. But a lot of the theories that we focused on really get this basic idea that individual activists and individuals on the ground have to believe that these treaties are effective. So if you think that someone sees that their country has signed on to this treaty, they'll be more likely to take a case to court or more likely to work with an NGO. You have to have this fundamental belief that they think the treaty could be effective. Well, we as scholars, for most of the history that we focused on this question and have tried to build a theoretical understanding of this question, have really not understood whether individuals even think treaties are effective at all. I would even go a step further and say that we haven't even focused on whether individuals think human rights are important. So do they actually think they have these rights? Do they actually think these rights are something that should be advocated for? Before David's work and Jim's work, I don't think we knew this as scholars on the large scale. So if we're building a theory for how treaties work, this is really fundamental knowledge that we have to understand. So that's Bob the Builder, for those of you that don't have small children. So if you're building a theory on treaties, again, and the theoretical development is on this idea that treaties help make, the treaties are effective when people believe in them, we do need to have more public opinion research about whether this is actually the case, right? And that helps you build the theory and the causal mechanisms connecting treaties to what actually happens on the ground, to actual human rights improvement. So that's the first reason, this theoretical development. My second reason why I think we need more survey research is this idea that sometimes we have really well laid out theories for how things work and how human rights change occurs, but we haven't been able to test key components of, or key implications of this theory. And one example that I work with quite frequently is Kekin-Saki's boomerang model. So I'm sure I don't have to explain the boomerang model. You probably all had it since your first freshman class, but it's this idea that international actors can get involved in a domestic situation, and from their continued involvement, you lead to human rights change. Well, one hypothesis that is kind of underlying Kekin-Saki's model is this idea that individuals, when they come across a message of an NGO, that they will actually change their opinion. So their opinion on what's going on within either their own country or another country will change once they hear this NGO's message. Now, unfortunately, up until very recently, we did not know whether this hypothesis was actually something that was supported with evidence. And it was because of this lack of data that we had on public opinion surveys. In testing some of these existing hypotheses, we can also help build further theory. And there's someone that's not here in this room, Matt Crane, who's done a lot of work on survey experiments about how messages from NGOs can actually translate into calls for action. And so his work actually takes the existing theory from Kekin-Saki and pushes it a little further to look at how different messages resonate with local populations. And so you can look up that work. It's actually in, I think, last month's APSR. Okay, so my third point. Now, maybe we all just want to talk to each other in this room, and we all want to get published in just human rights journals, but it's probably better for our career and our tenure files if at some point we fit ourselves within the larger IR scholarship. And so in order to do this, I think we have to be speaking the language of our colleagues. And there's been some critiques that the human rights literature was unscientific, it was too motivated by some sort of activist bent instead of some sort of pure social science bent. And I think one way to push back on that is to actually get published in the top journals. And we've done that over time. And so this is data down here from the William & Mary's TRIP project, which looks at journal articles and codes IR journals over time as to what topics are getting covered. And as you can see, there's just been this increase over time in the number of articles that talk about human rights that are getting published in the top IR journals. In order to continue this, however, we have to continue to speak the language of our colleagues. And we have to inform our work from the larger theoretical discussions that are occurring across subfields. And so in order to do this, I think we really need this focus on public opinion research. So this is from that same TRIP survey, the same survey of journal articles in top IR journals over time. And as you can see, these are articles that focus on public opinion. And so this is overall public opinion has increased in our time. Our colleagues are talking about it. But down here, as you can see, when Jim and David don't publish, there's no articles in top IR journals about human rights using public opinion. And so I think this is a real disconnect where we can grow as a subfield and grow as a discipline if we actually incorporate public opinion studies into our research. And this data does not show another thing that's happening, another trend that's happening in the literature, and that's to use survey experiments. And so if I did this, I think especially post-2010, we see a drastic increase in those types of things that are happening with the IR subfield. And then finally, just to conclude, I think the last thing that public opinion research really does is it helps us connect the actual activists in the field. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that is one of the major goals of science, and science, whether it's social science or otherwise, is to help improve humanity. And so, we know more about what contributes to human rights outcomes. We can develop better theories and test the implications of those theories. And then finally, this is great for assessments of advocacy. So we can actually really connect to the individuals in this room that are working on the ground as opposed to the ivory tower. So that is basically it, and I'm really excited to learn about the state of the art in the next 2 days. Thanks.
David, can I just introduce our next speaker?
Thank you, Amanda. You are part of the state of the art.
Thank you. So the way we constructed this first panel was to have some of the kind of leading figures in each of their subfields speak. And Amanda, if you haven't gathered this already, is probably the most exciting mid-career scholar in international relations and human rights today. She entertains multiple job offers, including from my university every year, and Missouri is damn lucky to have been able to hold on to her, and I don't know what they're giving her, but whatever they're giving her, it must be something really great, because she still stays there. Amanda is truly the cutting edge. Now we're going to shift gears away from the international relations subfield, and we're going to talk about the world of campaign strategy. Dalia Schendlin is, when people at foundations ask me, how can NGOs use human rights data to actually improve what they do, I say they should call Dalia Schendlin, because Dalia is, she was trained with Stan Greenberg many years ago, and she works as a consultant to political parties on how to get themselves elected. But what she really loves to do is to work on social messaging campaigns. And I learned that she had done an extraordinary series of polls with Israeli human rights groups about 4 years ago that she's going to tell you about. It's absolutely path-breaking work. It wasn't academic work, it was campaign-focused, applied work, but it really showed me how this material could be used to actually guide the work of human rights organizations. And I'm very excited to see that Kara from the other foundation and others are beginning to do the same. So, without further ado, over to Dalia.
And I'm going to apologize because I think I'm going to sit here only so I can see my notes, which I'm